Welcome to the Native Species Reforestation Symposium. Please take a seat, and if you can, we'll try to fill these first couple rows. So grab some coffee and tea and join us in these first couple rows so it feels nice and homey. We're all here together. Okay, and it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces and merging of these worlds from the Yale community to the global restoration community, the ELTI wider community. So thanks for coming. My name is Gracie Bachman, and I'm the Rwanda program coordinator for ELTI, Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative. We have a great lineup of practitioners and scientists that are thinking about how do we incorporate native species and restore landscapes. How do we incorporate those species into our restoration interventions from a scientific perspective all the way to the farm? And so you'll see as we progress through all of our speakers, we're going to go from a more well, it's never a pure scientific lens. I think everyone here is a multidisciplinary scientist or practitioner, but we'll go kind of from a more scientific and research lens all the way to the farm. So I think that'll be a great journey. And I'll let each person introduce themselves as we go to save time. But first, I'll hand the microphone to Dr. Amy Vedder for a bit of a welcome.
It's both an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome you all, because this event and all of you here is a combination of so many things that are special to me and dear to my heart. To have Rwandan colleagues here who have come so far to share all that you are learning, all that you are doing, and having spent so many years in Rwanda and seeing the change over the last number of decades, and to see these leaders leading the efforts now is just a fantastic thing. So for us to be able to share that with the Yale community, which is where I am now, at least my paid work, is a really nice arc, a nice bridge for me. It also is a bridge of, I started in conservation doing science. And so to be able to have the combination, the merging of science and then practice, the actual results that we can get for conservation. Again, the speakers today, not just from Rwanda, but also from Panama, Ecuador, you students from all sorts of different countries. What we get to experience in our classrooms now is that shared learning across all of those spaces and all of those examples. And to go from the stronger sort of conservation efforts to, wait a minute, there's conservation in our daily lives all the time. And I see that in native species and how important they are in the daily lives and the livelihoods of people across the world. So it's not just protected areas, although I am a defender of protected areas, but it's also those species and that wildness in our lives on a daily basis. And when we see those native species as part of our lives, part of our spiritual, our cultural, or our economic lives, it just gives me great joy to see that everywhere, anywhere. It's not just in those places that are remote, far away, and what we sometimes call pristine. So that to me is another coming together that I really, really enjoy. Space across the world, science to practice and results, and that being part of who I am, seeing those results that come from all of that diversity. So and one of the ways that I have experienced that in the last couple of years is through ELTI. The Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative is something that I started working on the online course and thought, online, you don't get to see the students, it's not so personal. I have gotten great satisfaction now about interacting with people across the world in this online course, because we do have live sessions as well as other ways of teaching and learning, again, sharing across each other. So to see ELTI now involved in Rwanda, which is where I started, and to see that coming together through Gracie and all the work that you're doing, again, gives me tremendous pleasure, gratitude. And so I'm here to say welcome, but I'm also here to say thanks to all of you and all that you're doing and all that continues to happen, and these arcs, these bridges that are being built all the time. So thank you.
Okay, I'll pass the mic to Dr. Mark Ashton, who will deliver us a keynote presentation on applied ecology in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, Eva Garin, who's our director of ELTI, got all sort of nervous. You are going to talk about native species, aren't you? Yes, I am. And hopefully I'll be able to master this. What I'm going to talk about, I have to, I'm getting a bit of an old fart. So the first thing you should recognize is please don't, well, you are going to date me. You're going to see a lot of old papers from the 1990s. But I'm going to give you an example of a program that I've been collaborating with my Sri Lankan colleagues for now close to 35, 40 years. It's still going, but it is a program around restoration, around human livelihoods, and around collaboration among various kinds of disciplines, and around capacity building, particularly within universities in Sri Lanka, but also my own here at Yale. So I am an applied ecologist, and I'm a forester by training. And so I had a unique opportunity of doing my doctoral work in Sri Lanka, and then basically for life becoming a part of a collaborative program that still engages me. We have our own NGO, and we do a lot of work in and around a big Man in the Biosphere Reserve, World Heritage forest called the Singharaja. So I'm going to talk a little about the conceptual approach, how we sort of gauge social circumstance, understanding the biophysical constraints, very important in terms of restoration and working with native species, testing in the application of silvicultural treatments, that's what is applied forest ecology, restoration, and then how we communicate and extend to a much broader audience. And so the first thing for all folks who think in terms of ecology, and particularly in terms of applied ecology, is that you are actually embedded in social circumstance. And I know a lot of my academic colleagues are perhaps working and looking at the theoretical constructs of issues around the biology and the physical sort of environment, around climate, around forests, around soils. But if you get to practice applied ecology, then you essentially are embedded in a social circumstance. And one needs to really understand that context before you think about application. The other thing you need to think about is where you are in terms of social circumstance, where you are in terms of society's well-being, the livelihoods, the economics that people are struggling with in terms of trying to make a living. And in the case of the world today, I hope I get this right. Yeah, oh yeah, okay. You can be thinking about attributes, social attributes, political attributes, economic attributes that relate to ownership, governance, access, use, and the nature and the condition of land cover anywhere in the world, and you're looking at different kinds of land transformations, different kinds of circumstances, economic circumstances around the ability to manage trees and forests and sustainability. And in the case of Sri Lanka, it is a country with strong titled ownership. In many cases, that's not the case. There is a good deal of diversification in ownership between both government, municipal, large private, smallholder landscapes. And there is relatively stable and secure social infrastructure. And if you think about many of the circumstances when you're an applied ecologist, you're trying to work with forests, this is ideal. There are many regions that are now becoming stable, having essentially secure land tenure. There is no point planting a tree for the future if you don't have secure land tenure. You plant trees with the incentive of the reward 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So social stability in any kind of restoration and applied ecology construct is really, really important. So Sri Lanka had it and still does at that time in the 1980s when we started this. And so when I think about understanding our research and our program and how it's matured, applied means for whom? When I'm an applied ecologist, a silviculturalist, I need to think, yes, I need to know all about the ecology, the biological constraints of what I can and cannot do, plant, select. But who are you doing this for? You are driven again within that social construct. It's a value-laden phenomena. Who are you doing this for? So that's what makes, for me, such an interesting phenomenon. I am an ecologist, but I am essentially serving and understanding the social drivers of a landscape. And so that is actually unusual. If you think about most ecologists, we tend to be in our own little biosphere, somewhat secluded and somewhat opinionated about, well, I apologize, about life and livelihoods and the real world that is going on outside of academia. But we're not. We try and connect with the real world. We're an applied school. We're a professional school. We're training individuals who hopefully will go out and make a difference to this world. So it is value-laden, and it is, in terms of applied forest ecology, that is the discipline of silviculture. I am trying to work with the citizenry, with landowners, to figure out and to help and to create other avenues for betterment of humans, and at the same time for the conservation of resources. So yes, it's really important to understand social circumstance if you're going to be an applied ecologist, if you're going to be a restoration ecologist, if you're going to be a forester. And in our construct, we really needed to understand, and in many, many regions of the world, we do not fully understand the dynamics and the complexity of rainforests. It's an undervalued resource, and it doesn't have the foundational information upon which we can essentially apply that knowledge for the betterment of people. And so one of the foundational sort of objectives of what we did in Sri Lanka back in the 1980s and 90s was to really understand how forests regenerate across this landscape, across the Singaraja forest, and then use that knowledge to then test and apply and create different kinds of regeneration, restoration strategies for different kinds of landowners and social values. There is no one restoration strategy. So this is the Singaraja. This is the World Heritage Site. It's a 20,000 hectare piece of land in southwestern Sri Lanka. It is a legacy of, it's surrounded by human-dominated land uses, particularly in terms of agroecology, in terms of tea and home gardens, both subsistence and commercial crops, rubber. It is essentially an ancient of Gondwanan origin, Deccan Gondwanan origin, so it's a very, very, has high endemicity, and yet it is a continental flora related to those of the Western Ghats in India, mixed ditch-carp forest. And we work in that area. We also work with the social and human landscape around it. Here is this landscape around it. It is very complex, a tapestry of different land uses, of tea, of tree gardens, of paddy cultivation, various kinds of riparian forests and relic forests after land clearance that is an adjacent to the Singaraja. Households manage land on very small acreages, maximum of maybe 1 acre, to essentially grow and cultivate both tea and tree gardens, subsistence and commercial crops for human livelihoods. We had, in terms of social, economic, sort of, and cultural research, we have a lot of knowledge. It's provided me an incredible enrichment of how I work within that social science framework, that cultural framework. A lot of my colleagues at the various universities I listed in Peradeniya and Sri Jadapura and Uva Walesa have gathered lots of information on indigenous knowledge, on household economies, on the role of non-timber forest products in the village economy, traditional food reliance within the adjacent natural forest, and then essentially the economics of some of these really important commercial, exotic crops like tea, rubber, coconut, the economics of tourism now growing within the Singaraja forest, the value of particularly downstream services and water that this forest provides to the urban elites and to the citizenry in the cities downstream. But there are lots of issues in the Singaraja that we had to face. Public lands, non-timber forest products, they're over extracted. There's a lot of highly valued non-timber forest products that people extract, but they're essentially exploited. Same with logging. Many of these public lands require management through multiple stakeholders, different governance systems rather than the concession system, which to me, I regard as a bit of a failure, and it's widely applied throughout the tropics. Private company lands, there's quite a bit of large private corporate company lands. How do they manage that land? There's a lot that relates to tea rehabilitation and downstream pollution, particularly in terms of surface waters. And then smallholder lands, which own about 65%, the greater proportion, in which there's an over-reliance on tea income for their sustenance, for their income, and also ephemeral or transient labor where they work in cities. This is not an uncommon situation in many places in the tropics. So in regards to the social economic sort of implications for silviculture and applied ecology, smallholders, we need to think about how can we create and diversify various kinds of crops for smallholders, commercial crops. When you diversify crops, you're reducing risk, particularly in terms of income. Public services downstream, how does one essentially restore degraded watersheds, particularly in terms of large private tea lands, where there's a lot of surface runoff, and it's the drinking watershed for downstream citizenry. How does one essentially create and restore wastelands? Many of them are municipal or government-owned lands. How can we create them to become more novel, more useful, but also more diverse in terms of conservation, native species that can be applied to human livelihoods in the surroundings. So there's a range, and this is old tea land that it's not coming back to forest. It's been there for 30 years. It's dominated by one single native fern. It's a pan-tropical fern, Dichronopsis linearis, that is essentially triggered and remains in that state just by permanent periodic fire. Or very heavy surface erosion, particularly on private, both smallholder and private commercial lands, which were altisols. Altisols are very, very susceptible to erosion. So looking at the biophysical, you can sort of follow along, and hopefully you can just tell me when to get off the stage. I have a habit of going on and on. Most folks know this. But here, this is Singaraja. This was a photograph that I took back in 1985 when I was a student. This was my mentor, who's now retired, Professor Nimal Gunatilaka. Still work a lot with Nimal and his wife, married couple, Professor Savitri Gunatilaka. But this is a 25-hectare plot. And we used that 25-hectare plot where every stem has been monitored and measured to gauge and understand the dynamics of the native forest relative to the human-dominated landscape, a shifting mosaic of different kinds of tree gardens and tea plantations that we also monitor. And am I going to get there? And it looks like that, okay? When you start mapping trees, you see tree species. These are big canopy trees, some of them in the Ditricarpaceae, genus Shorea, some of them in the Clusiaceae, genus Mesua. you see these species being extremely site restricted. They have particular affinities for different sites. This is what makes up the diversity in these kinds of forests. There's an enormous amount of congeneric assemblages, diversification of these assemblages within genera. Why is that? One needs to know the foundational ecology and then apply it for restoration. So it's competitive hierarchy. Different species are actually preferring different sites through competition. They have different sets of adaptations. But in order to know competitive hierarchy, we need to essentially find out what mechanisms are driving what species in terms of differentiation. And to do that, we've done essentially a triangulation effect. All social scientists should be very, very proud of me. Right, Eva? We're using different, essentially experimental biophysical, biophysical and disciplines from the biophysical sciences in terms of the population ecology of seedlings, the anatomy and physiology of seedlings, the biometeorology of the climate, all these together to try and gauge at the leaf level, at the controlled growth shelter, and at the population level, what is driving these topographic affinities? Is it drought? Is it soil nutrition? Is it differences in disturbance regime? You need to know that in order to understand what to plant where and under what kind of value and strategic sort of restoration strategy. So here are just some examples, and this is why I feel so embarrassed, because I've just taken this out of my doctoral dissertation, 1989. Ooh. Okay, so, but what I wanted to show you is this is essentially the fluctuation of water across different topographies in the forest. Yes, it receives 6,000 millimeters of rain a year, but even though the climate is the same across this topography, there are big differences in water relations. That's really important to recognize. Okay, and you can see this by looking at different plantings. This is essentially just the survival, V stands for valley, mid-slope, or ridge, of the same species, Shorea trapezifolia, across a gap. This is the center of the gap, this is the center of the gap, this is the center of the gap. These are on the either side of the understories of the gap. And you can see all I'm showing you is survival. There are noticeable differences for one species in their ability to survive in their interaction between understory environments and open environments. And that's the same for many species that we planted and tried to understand these interactions at the population level. You can see right here, there's big differences in survival in terms of seedlings in the understory. Okay, here is a whole mix of different species. We experimented with a lot of species to understand how do species recruit in these forests? What is their shade tolerance? And many of these species can sit there and be 25 years old and not more than 15 centimeters. They are tiny, and yet they have an incredible endurance. Others, on the other hand, can't. They die very rapidly. How do they coexist? They do coexist, but they have very different phenologies and different masting and recruitment strategies. When one looks at the greenhouse studies, it allows us to understand how they partition, how different species partition in terms of their growth, above ground, below ground. Which species are putting in more below ground as compared to above ground? Which ones are more drought tolerant? Which ones are more light loving? And we can get at some of the mechanisms that they're doing in terms of species diversification by looking at, these are all, okay, this is one species. These are the shade leaves. These are the sun leaves for Shorea megistophylla. These are the shade leaves for Shorea worthingtonii and the sun leaves. There's a big difference in index and chlorosis. Some species are very shade tolerant. Some species are more tolerant of higher light regimes. So just by looking at differences in morphology, and I know as in terms of, okay, they all look the same. No, they're all different species and they don't hybridize. Understanding these kinds of differences is fundamental for building a bottom-up, fundamentally information-rich silvicultural system for reforestation in a number of different ways for human values. This is not top-down. This is investment in the science of place. And unfortunately, it takes money, it takes stamina, it takes a lot of long-term commitment and collegiality among people with a common emphasis. And here is some of the differences in sort of leaf, shade, sun between different species, closely related. And then when you look at their relationships, you can see they are diversifying in terms of the number in this axis. It's the number of stomata in the shade leaf versus the number of stomata in the sun leaf. And there are big differences in water use efficiency, even within genus. Differences among species are essentially segregating out across that topography in relation to shade, in relation to disturbance, in relation to drought tolerance, in relation to soil fertility. So, yes, in summary, we characterized a whole bunch of 65 native tree species in this way. We have a very good understanding of tolerance and different kinds of axes of tolerance between shade, nutrients, and light, and their ability to sustain or essentially be susceptible to various kinds of herbivores, pathogens. And then we've also worked on a variety of other kinds of, particularly not all these species are commercially important, but we definitely focused on a bunch of different shrub and liana species that were commercially important found in the forest. Okay, so what are some of the silvicultural implications for application? We have regeneration processes, which are actually very similar across these topographies. 5 minutes, I've been told. Okay. And they're all release type disturbances. In other words, they're generally wind type disturbances of different sizes and frequencies, and those are particular in relation to topographic position, which allows for different degrees of shade-tolerant assemblages to be essentially associated with different parts of the topography. That's pretty interesting. That's unusual. There's also big differences in terms of drought tolerance that coexist interacting with the different degree of scale and frequency of wind and disturbance. I say release because the ground story is not destroyed. It's dependent upon that enduring supply of seedlings in the understory. What is important is there is essentially a lack of novelty in this forest type. That's really important to understand. The diversity is not that novel. They all have very similar adaptations. So when you clear the forest with a lethal or sublethal forest, they are gone. That's very different from many other tropical forest types. They don't have a very good seed dispersal strategy, and they're very, very sensitive, if you think about them, to enduring understory light conditions. You cannot just essentially assume that they're going to seed back in on a new landscape. In fact, it just goes to fernland. What to do? Oops, excuse me. There's low plasticity. And niche differentiation promotes very refined, or will promote very refined prescriptions about what to do where, if you're going to look at planting or looking at facilitating secondary succession. And of course, most NTFPs are actually early cereal and fairly easy to manage within this landscape. They're very productive, but the soils are also extremely sensitive. Sensitive to erosion, sensitive to nutrient depletion, sensitive to changes in hydrology. So when you're looking at this sort of staircase, we need to understand where we are in terms of restoration for different social values. Low severity, medium severity, and high severity. There are different kinds of lethality. And understanding the level of degradation, understanding the foundational knowledge of what you've got in terms of the ecology of the species that you're going to be working with, one needs to think about what are you going to do under what circumstance. And so here's an example of studies that we looked at in which we enriched and planted, or we worked with assisted natural regeneration in logged over forests. This is least severity restoration strategies in which you are supplementing certain species that have been essentially lost from that forest type because of overlogging and the loss of a seed source. Here's another example, but this is with medium severity degradation. Here it's medium severity restoration. Those fernlands, in this circumstance, you can work with simple initial floristics, and you're going to get a simple mixture back. You have to do a fairly acute disturbance regime. You have to till the soil, and you're going to get essentially pioneers of what I call initiation. But that's it. No late successional species. Some of these are useful in terms of it's going to reboot secondary succession, but entirely pioneer, short-lived pioneer dominated. And if you're looking at trying to facilitate a longer-lived pioneer assemblage, we work with exotics. In this circumstance, this is Pinus caribea, and we're using it as an artificial analog to old field pine that is very much a relay floristic analog to what goes on here with native forests. And it's essentially allows for, provided you exclude fire, many long-lived late successional and long-lived pioneers to come in underneath. No planting necessary. But then if you're looking at some of these really late successional species that are have very strong topographic affinities, we still use the old field pine analog. This has been going on now for 35 years. So it's no longer a Caribbean pine plantation. It's a second growth mixed ditricarp forest with these essentially the same natural assemblages that you saw in the rainforest topography in prior photographs. But we started out with early successional non-timber forest products, and we moved to the plantings topographic dependent of particular late successional species that have now grown up. And we tested them across these sort of light environments, removing gaps in the Caribbean pine to facilitate their growth in particular microenvironments. This is an experiment. They like essentially their best growth when you remove 3 rows and plant in between the rows for most of these species, not all. Okay, and this is the last one, and then we're going to wrap up. Yep. Working with initial floristics and working with mixed tree garden systems that are primarily native species. And this is where we work with long-lived pioneers, short-lived pioneers, and late successional species in which we immediately create the architecture. That's why I say it's initial floristics, almost at the same time. The short-lived pioneers create the umbrella, and then the long-lived pioneers come to create what's called stem exclusion, which allows for the shading out of the understory, which is often exotic grasses, ferns, and allows us to underplant all sorts of both non-timber forest products, shade, spice plants, medicinals, and also longer-lived timber trees. And you're just looking at essentially a series of years. Year 1, this is one of my colleagues, Professor Savitri Gunatilaka. This is year 2. So year 1, year 2, this is by year 6, it's into stem exclusion. So I think I should probably speed up, but we've done a lot of economic analysis to find out which systems are economically viable. You can't practice restoration if they're not of value to human livelihoods, and they have and they're of worthwhile to people. And so these are examples of some of the non-timber, the net present value analyses. This was done in 2014. It was the paper that was discounted from 2000, another paper in 2000. But you're looking at dollars per hectare into the future of different combinations of restoration strategies. This is an intensive system, mixed Caribbean pine and richland planting that you saw. This is just working with the native species that come in unassisted. What's the economic value of those species? And this is in comparison to poor tea land, sort of our reference system. So finishing up, we're still going. I'm still alive. My colleagues are still alive. Some of us have retired. I guess I'm about to retire. But it is a life. It's basically, when you're looking at the science of place and making a commitment to that place, it is a lifetime of commitment. But it's very gratifying. It's gratifying in terms of extension, it's gratifying in terms of communication, and it's gratifying in terms of educating and engaging with the students, both in my case, Sri Lankan students, but also my students here at Yale who've been engaged with this project for the last 40 odd years. So we are going into the future. We're still doing the same sort of philosophical attitude of trying to find that sweet mixture between engaging with the communities, conducting research, and education. But this would not happen without collaboration, without my colleagues, without my students, without an investment with a number of different kinds of organizations in the long term. Poor old USAID. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Mark. We will now hear from Dr. Bonaventure Nhirigwa, if I got it correct. So please join us. Great. Do you want to use this?
Good afternoon. So, my name is Nhirigwa Bonaventure. I'm a researcher, scientist in the forestry and the environmental sciences. So, I'm going to present the suitability of native tree species across the different regions of Rwanda, considering the climate sensitivity. So the research have been conducted on 3 sites across elevation gradient. There is high elevation. This landscape, you can see the sky. It is a mountain forest at elevation above 2,000 meters above sea level. And this is a middle elevation above around 1,600 meters above sea level. You can see those we call rain shelter that are used to exclude the water. Because here we have a high rain. Here we do have middle rain. To regulate the water, we evacuate the extra water. Comparing it to the lowland the warm site, here we irrigate. So those are the rain shelter for exclusion rate water. We irrigate where the water is not enough. We eliminate water where water is more than the other side. This is an experimental 3 experiments. We started by shade to study the behavior of trees under shade. That is important in management, in forest management, because we mixed late succession and the early successional tree species. Why? We will see later why this is important. And so we have to know what is the shade which is good for a certain tree species, especially the shade tolerant, we call shade tolerant, and the shade and the light demanding. So shade tolerant are those that are growing under shade. To grow better, they need shade. And so there is a canopy is different across the canopy, sparse canopy, and the open canopy. And so we assess the base canopy that the trees, shade-tolerant trees can be better grow. I will show the results after. We also tested this worm experiment where we planted in the open area without shade, using the same species because we do have, shade tolerant and shade light demanding and shade tolerant. The species that have been used here and here and here, they are the same, but the number of species is not the same. Here we use the 6, 3 species, 3 early successional, and the 3 late successional. And here we use the 2. But the result from here, we also use them to create another experiment that was used under open canopy, and then the same species, only we increase the number of species have been used in mixed plantation. As I said, elevation gradient. Here is high elevation, mid elevation, and low elevation. So they are what? Early succession, late succession. Those are mountain forest, and the Lake Victoria transitional forest at lowland. So they have been mixed in 3 sites under plantation, mixed plantation, to evaluate the performance. So I don't delay so much because there is a matter of many figures and many results, but I summarize these results into one figure to explain the behavior of the species, especially those that have been has been assessed in experiment. And so, as I showed, here with the 20 species, 9 late succession and 11 early successional, they have been planted in one plantation in 3 sites. And so those are the results. The species that originated from high elevation, this part, are successional, tropical, mountain forest, and here is are successional Lake Victoria transitional forest. Lake Victoria, it is between this elevation. And late successional tropical mountain forest and the late successional Lake Victoria transitional forest. So the healthy growth here, they are the 3 species, 20, and these are healthy growth. It is just an example because we have a healthy growth, we have basal area, we have a diameter. We took one example to show how the growth is looking like. We can see that early successional, because the red color represents low elevation, yellow mid elevation, and high elevation. We can see that at the low elevation, one side, the growth is what? Is increased. Where for the species that are a successional tropical mountain forest. And so if we count 1, 2, 3, and 4, 4 species out of 5. The growth is what? The growth is increased at one site. Wait, for those originated from Lake Victoria Transition Forest, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all. Meaning that the growth, the warming increases the growth, especially the species originated from one site. It is not the same an early late successional tropical mountain forest. They are not all, but we have seen 2 species out of 5, which also increases the growth at one site. That are late succession from tropical mountain forest, and one species originated from low site. And so we can conclude that the warming increases the tree growth, especially in the successional and originated at low elevation warm site. But about the tree mortality also increase the warming increase the tree mortality, especially in the late successional tropical mountain forest, even in the late successional transition forest. So warming is good for tree growth, especially in the successional, originated from lowland or from one site, but it is not good for late succession. Hey, she saw me. Yes. I have only 2 minutes. Yes. Okay. Those are the results from the experiment for paper. I used it for my thesis. I worked on the tree growth and the mortality, especially how to deal with how to plant, and I studied what kind of management you can do with these native tree species, but not all. Those are 4 paper. I forgot to mention it is here. You can find it online. And also we worked on other papers that have been published, 7. We worked on the leaf temperature, hydrological threat, 2 paper, leaf morphology. Professor said talking about hypothesis and respiration. They provided additional information. I can summarize like that. Why leaf morphology? Professor showed the form of leaf. Because we study also why this growth rate and why this die. Many late successional tree species, they die because they have a big leaf, thin leaf. They receive much radiation, but they respire less. The respiration is lower, and they cannot avoid the desiccation, avoid the harming. In the contrary, the successional having small leaves and the not thick leaf, they receive less radiation and transpire more. You know that the transpiration is cooling. That is the secret for some trees. And some also use to the root tip that can go far for water. And then when they capture water from deep soil. So the grass is disturbing me. She said that. Yes, my time was finished, but I was I'm going to finish. Okay, sorry, Gracie, 1 minute and finish. Thank you. Yes, and the others, we measure the water use efficient, so the security are different, and we know that when this can grow better there because of this, and we give recommendation for the species that can be used in the plantation. That this I don't read because the time don't wait. I just want to say that the fundings shows that there is no need to delay the plantation, the rate plantation of rate successional. The simultaneous plantation is possible and succeed. And without taking much time, our research reduces uncertainty in native species performance and support climate smart restoration, because many people think that the native species, the growth rate is slow. They are not right, because we showed that native species also has fast growing. And I thank you for your attention. And please visit Nyungwe. We are waiting for you. You're working on the canopy.
Thank you so much, Bonaventure. And I know I am miming time signals to the speakers, but that's only so we have time for questions. Because I think there's so many interesting takeaways, and I know you have follow-up questions. So please forgive me for this, disturbing your train of thought. But I want to welcome our next speaker, Professor Dr. Canisius Mugunga. And I think please come join us. He's kind of really building on, in certain ways, what Bonaventure is doing, studying these forest trees. How will they adapt in a changing climate? How would they adapt to the different climatic conditions on a farm? And then now we have a true agroforester among us to highlight what some of that research looks like, really thinking about on-farm applications. So.
Good afternoon, if not evening. Canisius Mugunga, as Grace has just said, I'm going to talk on restoring native tree species in one agro ecosystems. As we're going to see, Rwanda is a small country in the East Central Africa region, which has a rough terrain, mountains, ups and downs, has a high variation in altitude, in temperatures, rainfall. So there are many, although it is small, but it has great variations which lead to differences in site conditions for tree and crop growing, of course. And having very high population growth with very small land holdings per household, you find a household, the average land size per household is 0.5. And sometimes this 0.5 is divided into smaller 3-4 pieces. So you find actually some are too small to grow trees on actually. But because people depend on wood for energy and other products, they still grow trees on the very small pieces of land. And this leads to high interaction between trees and crops. There has been trees that grow on farm have mainly been exotics, with eucalyptus species leading, but other tree species also, like grevillea, used for timber production, coriander, Dracena, and others used for soil fertility management and soil erosion control. They are all exotics. And one fact also is that with the variation of the environment that we just saw, same tree species are grown on lowland across to highland areas, because we have only a few species that are grown, that are available for farmers to grow. So you find grevillea grown as low as 800, 900 meters in southwest in Bugarama, and they still grow in north and northwest where it is above 2,000 meters. You could not expect the same tree species to grow and produce wood, to perform equally in such a varied environment. But that is farmers still grow those because they're the ones available. Now, with the restoration, which we are trying to do now using native tree species, we intend to test more species to see which can perform where, so that those which are fit in high altitude are the ones used, and those that can fit better in low altitude are the ones used there. Now the work that I'm presenting is only just starting. I don't have data for many years as others have done. And we are even trying to see which species can grow on farm, how can they interact with crops without reducing too much of crop yield to avoid causing food security problems with the farmers. We also, in some cases, we even don't know how to propagate such species. So we start from propagation, trying to see if they can grow outside forests, because we're just starting with them. They have never been grown on farm before, and seeing how they can now perform in different ways. We also have started trying those that we have started growing. We also try to see if we can use their leaves to manage soil fertility, which is an issue because of intensive cultivation of the small land, sometimes with poor farming practices. There's a lot, high level of soil fertility decline, high rates of soil erosion, and so on. So we are using some of the same species that we are testing. We use them. We test their leaves for checking how much nutrients they contain and how they decompose, the decomposition rate. Those that can be decomposed fast, those that can decompose fast, we suggest them for use as green manure, and those that decompose less, maybe because of high contents of tannins and polyphenols, they can be used as much, which is also necessary for farming. This Does not work. What's happening?
Okay. Maybe we
Oh,
advance here.
okay. Right.
Is that the
Okay.
next one?
Mhm.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, now it's working.
Oh.
We're back.
No,
Yes.
thank you. This figure shows there was a study in 2018 by Yama and others who studied just the number of trees that are found in farm in Rwanda across agroecological zones, and they identified about 30, although some of these are not actually trees, like there is papaya there, I can see. Out of 30 that they identified, only 7 were indigenous. And even among the 7 native trees that they saw, only 3 are commonly used by farmers on farm. So you can see there are only very few native tree species grown on farm. And you can see some of the native trees grown with crops on farm. These ones also. No. The picture where there is water, that's a lake. Those are species grown in a number of species grown near the lake where we test their performance, and they are growing very well. The trees that you see were slightly less than 2 years when they were measured, but they are growing very fast, faster than we could think. And farmers have started taking up some of these species and growing them on farm, which is nice. And oh, come on. There are studies, one and small here and there. We are trying to do to see if we can do something. There's a study which also was done on characterizing native fruit trees to see the distribution, the nutritive value of the fruits, and also see if farmers can take them up and grow them on their farms. That is done. There has been also some studies on some trees which were planted some years back, studying their interaction with the crops. And there are 9 species, I think. This is Ficus toningi, which is usually found in home gardens. So it is less competitive with crops. We started corn and bean in this experiment. And this one is good. Already it's used by farmers, but other species, Polysis fulva, Podocarpus falcatus, are also less competitive with crops compared to other individuals like croton, which is very competitive. So at least we are getting some data, and we continue to follow up as the trees grow and as we increase the number of trees to see if we end up getting a good list to suggest to our farmers. This I mentioned that about the experiment. We also have some experiments. These are the two. All this came from Eastern Rwanda, where we have an experiment which is, we have 2 students working on them. One is working on studying on water uptake by eucalyptus tree species and gravilia, although they are not native, but we wanted to know how much water they take. Eucalyptus can take as much as was observed to take as much as 3 liters of water per day, while gravilia is taking half that, 1.5 liters per day. We also planted some indigenous tree species, macadamia being one of them. Macadamia is a native timber species. We have also Mesopsis emini, which I only learned yesterday that it's not a native tree species, but has been naturalized for sure, because it has been there for many years and is grown by farmers everywhere. And we have just installed sensors, subflow measurement sensors, but they are still small. So we did it only few days. Don't have data on the indigenous tree species, but of course we get that as we proceed with the experiment. And we decided that this experiment would be managed for a long term so that we get much more data on it. I'm being cautioned that my time is over. I'm finishing now. We will continue trying other indigenous tree species to see if they can be incorporated on farm, and how we manage them and how we use them and so on. I just have this picture. It's not very clear, but it is showing 2 trees. This is Acacia siberiana. It's a native tree species with lots of nests and beds inside, in them, and a eucalyptus tree which has no single nest, and they grow next to each other as you are seeing them from the picture. If this can show us how good native tree species can be in conserving biodiversity without even going to the number of insect species that come to the same tree, macro and microfauna which may be in the soil. So by increasing the number of native tree species, we certainly improve biodiversity on farm. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Professor. We look forward to seeing more and more of your results on those tree crop interactions. I think, seeing is really believing in Rwanda. When farmers understand and see the relationship with productivity, that's when a lot of change starts to happen. So thank you. Now I want to welcome Luke Brown, who will introduce himself to take us to another part of the world.
Is Will here?
I think it works. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Brown. Really happy to be here, and special thanks to our colleagues from Rwanda for traveling all this way to come to a very cold New Haven. I'm proud to be a part of this community. I'm a research scientist here at YSE and also a member of the ELTI team for their online programming. And the other hat I wear the other half of the week is the Director of Conservation for the Foundation for the Tropical Andes, for the Conservation of the Tropical Andes, which is a nonprofit based in Ecuador that has an integrated conservation program. So today I'm going to be talking about our reforestation work using native species. And one thing that's always fascinated me about tropical forests is just how close the connections there are between the trees and the animals. So we know that over 80% of tropical trees are dispersed by animals. And this right here is a long-wattled umbrella bird, which is an endangered endemic species to the Pacific coastal forest of Colombia and Ecuador. You can see it just picked up a palm fruit. It swallowed it. Gonna pick up another one right now, and then fly away off into the forest and just sort of do its thing. And reforestation is hard. Planting trees is hard. Planting seeds, it's hard. And these animals are just doing this for us all day long for free. So the question is, how can we leverage this sort of ecological interactions to accelerate reforestation? And that sort of idea or that mechanism underpins a reforestation technique called applied nucleation, which is a form of spatially patterned restoration. So on one end of the gradient, we could take a plantation-based planting approach where we pretty intensively plant out a grid of trees across the landscape. Say every 3 or 4 meters, we're planting trees all over the place. Really labor and resource intensive. The other end of the spectrum is natural regeneration, which we've heard in a few talks, where you just sort of let nature takes its course. And then somewhere in the middle is applied nucleation, where we plant these sort of strategic islands of trees, depending on the size, that serve as attractants to animals, to birds, to bats, to mammals, to come into this landscape, to regurgitate seeds, to poop out the seeds, and fill in the interstitial matrix area and help regenerate the forest. That's the idea. One of the questions is, does this actually work or not? Of course, that depends on what your definition is of working. What are we restoring towards? But thankfully, Karen Hull and colleagues have done a really nice experiment in Costa Rica, the Las Islas project, that's now, has been going on for more than 15 or 20 years. And what they found is that after about 15 years, you get pretty similar levels of canopy cover when you compare applied nucleation to plantation plots, and at least compared to natural generation. And then in any number of ecological responses you might look at in terms of the diversity of frugivorous birds or bats or animal dispersed seeds, you see similar responses between plantation and applied nucleation plots for about 1/3 of the costs. So there's potential that this is a cost-effective way to restore forests. But there's a number of key open questions, one of which is how does the composition of the trees that you're planting, which is relevant for all reforestation efforts, but specifically for this, how does the composition of the trees affect the regeneration process? And specifically, if we planted trees that frugivores prefer, will that help kickstart the recovery of these forests? The hypothesis here being that if we plant native trees that fruit really early and abundantly, that's going to attract seed dispersers, that's going to bring in more seed rain, and it's going to lead to faster and more diverse regeneration than if we didn't plant trees like that. And so our group is testing this in the Choco biogeographic region of Ecuador, specifically up in the northwestern corner. There's a small mountain range, the Machu Picchu Mountains. And this is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, and it's also heavily threatened by habitat loss. So over the past century or so, there's estimates that only less than 5% of the original forest cover remains in this area, primarily due to agricultural expansion. So there's a really big need for restoration approaches here. And so that's where FCAT comes in. We're a community-based nonprofit. Most of our members are local community members of this area of northwestern Ecuador. In our vision, what we're building towards is this 5,000 hectare biodiversity corridor, linking some major conservation assets with our reserve there in the middle. And we take an integrated approach with things like shade-grown cacao agroforestry systems, education, protected area management, and reforestation. And so right now, I'm really only going to be focusing on the reforestation work that we're doing. And so that brings us to the Choco Nexion project, which I have the honor of being on the stage to talk about this, but it's a huge team effort spearheaded by people like Leighton Reed for Virginia Tech and Zach Zahawi from the Charles Darwin Foundation, where this is a landscape scale applied nucleation experiment, kind of in the same vein as the Las Islas project in Costa Rica. And we have a really great group of people who we've been taking baseline data on these reforestation plots in terms of the forest structure with LIDAR, the soil biodiversity, the mammal biodiversity, and seed dispersal interactions and things like that over the past years. And so the design of the experiment, which we started planting in 2022 and 2023, is that we have about 116 of these 15 by 15 meter tree islands, where each of these circles represents a different tree with 25 trees in each of these islands. If you do the math, that adds up to about almost 3,000 native trees planted. And then this is an example of from establishing the plot to how it's grown up until about 2024. You can see it's starting to fill in, both in the plot itself and in the surrounding areas. And what we're testing with this is that question of how the fruiting, how the composition of the initial trees impacts the regeneration process. So we have 3 different treatments, one of which is planting either fruit-producing pioneer species like cecropias and figs to non-fruit producing pioneers, or pioneers that don't produce fruits that frugivores like wind-dispersed species. We're also manipulating the spacing of the islands. You can kind of see here, we have either 10, 20, or 30 meter distances between the islands, trying to find the sort of the optimal configuration of islands for restoration. And then also comparing planting 19 native species in a plot versus 4 species in a plot. So just comparing the effect of biodiversity and functional diversity alone. So we have the full factorial combination of all those along with control plots along the side. And so our quote unquote early observations, even after doing this for 4 years, is that we have had really relatively high survival in these plots, but a lot of variation across the sites in terms of how well they're doing. Some of the balsas that we're planting are already like 15 meters tall. This is one of our tallest team members, Domingo, right here, and you can see the tree sort of towering over him. Some of the species are starting to fruit, which is really exciting for this experiment because that's the whole point, is to test the effect of fruit. And so finally, these species are starting to fruit. But the results for the main question are coming in 2029. So I expect to see everyone here at ISTF in 2030, so you can get the results of this experiment. But this is a drone shot I took a few months ago where you could see the forest starting to fill in compared to what it was just a few years ago. But some of the general takeaways I just want to say about this work is that, we've seen these flash talks. We can tell that research on this sort of work takes a long time. We're not going to get results from the main question till 7 years after you start. And how long does it take to even do a PhD? Like, that's longer than a PhD. So it takes a lot of creativity and long-term commitment in terms of bridging together financing of short-term projects, because most funders only want to fund 1 to 3 year projects for stuff like this. So how do you do a decades-long project like Mark showed, sort of bridging together these smaller funding? Another major component is that local knowledge is really, really important for work like this. When you're working with a group of, say, 20 native species, many of which not really known well to science, it's just really important to have a strong local knowledge base, because they're the ones that are going to know what the phenology is, where the trees are, how to propagate them, and all that sort of stuff. So the only reason this project has been successful is because FCAT has developed those long-term relationships with local communities over the past 20 years. And the other point I want to make is that, some of the hardest things that are going to be to restore in systems like this are the things that we still don't understand. So planting the tree and building the forest structure is just sort of the first step. But there's sort of all these other things happening in a forest, like going back to our friend, the umbrella bird. This is a lecking species, which is a really cool animal behavior where males like this will congregate, like 10 males will congregate in a small area and do these crazy displays and dances in the hopes of attracting a female, which we'll see one in a second. A female like that will come in. And this is the only way this species breeds, is by having a lek and having a space for these displays. And at our restoration site, before FCAT acquired the property, there was a forest right there that got cut down for grazing. And there was a lek of the umbrella bird in that forest, in that exact spot that got cut down. And all the males dispersed. That lek is no longer there. And so one of the questions that we have is that lek even going to return? We could plant trees this whole area, but there's a pretty good chance that lek will never come back. And so there's these, amazing biological processes happening in the forest that we still don't understand. And I just want us all to reflect on, the challenges of restoration when you start thinking about all the interactions happening beyond just planting a tree. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. And if you want to get involved, if you're a student looking for a field site, you want to come visit, please get in touch. I'll be around the next few days. But thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Luke. And now we have our final flash talk, staying in a similar part of the world, but we'll go a little bit north to Panama. And I'll let Jake and Odielka introduce themselves. Okay.
Ah, okay. Which one is that? Is, okay.
And then this there.
Okay. Whoops. Got it.
Ok, gracias nuevamente a la Universidad de Yale y a la organización de ELTI por esta invitación tan apreciada a mi persona.
So thanks again to the Yale University and ELTI for the opportunity to present to you guys. And thank you for coming.
Ok, voy a hablar un poco de las restauraciones y también en lo que es mi finca, conocida como la finca El Ñopo y la más bella acá.
And she's going to be talking about the applied application of restoration using native species on her farm, which is called the El Ñopo Farm, but it's gained a very famous local nickname called the Most Badass Farm. My apologies, but
Sí, en mi finca tenemos especies, la mayoría, todas son especies nativas y lo más importante que es regeneraciones naturales.
so in her farm, she uses mainly native species, which she has planted, but she also uses natural regeneration as a passive form of restoration.
Mi finca solamente no es árboles, también nos dedicamos a la ganadería. Es una finca muy pequeña pero gigante.
And just to note that, so Odielka is a cattle rancher, and so her farm is mainly used for the production of beef cattle, but it's a very, although it's a very small farm, only 9 hectares, she considers it a big farm because of the diversified production of different species and different products. Vamos a hacer sí, a introducirte pues.
Okay. Seguimos en mi finca.
Pero usted puede presentarse primero como que se dedique usted y
Ah,
que
ok.
miembro de esa.
Mi nombre es Odielka. Aparecí primero como una ganadera, pequeña ganadera, y de allí creamos una asociación conocida como APASPE. Pertenezco como secretaria dentro de esa asociación. Después estuvimos muchas invitaciones de parte de ELTI y ahora llevamos más de 10 años colaborando con la Universidad de Yale.
Mhm. So again, her name's Odielka Solis. She's actually an accountant by training, but she is a cattle rancher. That's really her day job at this point. That focuses on civil pastoral systems, the integration of trees into pastoral landscapes. She's the secretary of a legally recognized ecological cattle ranchers association called APASPE, Asociación de Productores Pecuarios, well, I'm speaking in Spanish, the Association of Agro-Civil Pastoral Producers of Petitesí, and she's one of our facilitators of ELTI field courses. So when we have a course in our training sites in Panama, when we visit her model farm, she's the professor. She's the one that's explaining all these things. The gringo forester shuts his mouth and lets her run the show.
Como ven, en mi finca, antes, no tenemos el antes, pero sí lo van a conocer después, era una finca como trabajada como los abuelos. De allí tenemos un total de 8.2 hectáreas. Son bosques secos de 300 metros de elevación.
So she, again, mentioned she has a small farm that before she started using it was used in a very conventional way, usually a monoculture of pasture grass. It's small, it's only 8.2 hectares. It's located at 300 meters elevation, dry forest in the province of Los Santos in Panama.
Sí. Es una finca modelo para todo el país de Panamá y también para muchos países a nivel nacional e internacional. Y de allí compartimos mucho. Dentro de mi finca tenemos, como le dije antes, muchas especies nativas de árboles que funcionan como árboles de sombra para el ganado, arbustos como forrajes para el ganado, y tenemos de madera, de frutas, Mis cercas, todas mis cercas son cercas vivas.
Mhm. So again, she mentioned it's a model farm in the sense that it demonstrates a range of restoration activities as well as the native species where both local and international professional practitioners, students have visited. A lot of benefits that she receives by using native species, as you can see here, shade, forage, fruit, timber, all the fences of the farm that keep the cattle inside are living fences. These trees also help to maintain fertile soils, protect sources of water, and provide habitat for wildlife.
Tenemos 5 áreas muy importantes dentro de mi finca, las cuales de esas tenemos 37 especies de árboles y compartidas en sistemas silvopastoriles, agroforestales, plantaciones forestales dentro de la finca y áreas ribereñas que las protegemos para las aguas y algo muy importante dentro de la finca que lo creamos con árboles nativos que tenemos un corredor biológico.
So it's a really interesting farm because there's 5 primary areas where she's integrated native species. She's done a full inventory of the farm. There's 37 different native species on it. And the areas where she's integrated native species into the farm are civil pastoral systems, again, where you integrate trees into livestock pastures, agroforestry systems, which in her case is mainly coffee and fruit-based, timber plantations for the production of long-term production of timber, riparian areas, right, and gallery forests, and then finally, which you can see here on the map here, there's actually a biological corridor that she's developed inside the farm.
Como ven, tenemos las áreas de silvopastoril que damos el trabajo para el ganado, tenemos ganancias con el ganado, tenemos frutales, tenemos cercas, tenemos bancos de forrajes, cercas vivas que también son fuentes para la protección como paredes para los vientos.
So it's really interesting to see here, we have 4 different examples of how she's integrated species within civil pastoral systems. So there's different approaches here. In the top left, you see forage species, mainly Tithonia diversifolia, that's planted on contour, and that helps to promote soil conservation because in her farm she has steep slopes. You see here in the top right trees and palms that are dispersed throughout the pasture that provide both shade and fruit forage for the cattle. In the bottom left here, you see a forage bank, mixed forage bank with Tithonia, Desmodium, sugarcane, different species, but also timber species that are included in that forage bank. And then here you see something that's really neat on these farms are these multi-strata living fences, right? Which have everything from Jatropha, Gliricidia, Atalea, Spondius, kind of a mixture of different species, both fruit, timber, and species that just serve as the living fence to make that hedge.
Tenemos un área también de cítricos, no muy grande, frutales, que tiene mucho beneficio dentro de la finca.
And so here we have an example of an agroforestry system that she has on her cattle farm. So again, she used to just raise cattle for milk and meat, and now has diversified the farm, making an area specifically for agroforestry, which primarily focuses on citrus species, but has also integrated many different native species, including ingas, gliricidias, garcinias. And so it has, again, it's kind of a mixture. And she refers actually to the silvopastoral system como su huerto. It's her garden.
Y también tenemos árboles que son nativos y de allí rescatamos y logramos la integridad con el ganado y sacamos buena carne en Panamá.
And then, so you can see here, it's you can also establish native species in timber plantations where you do prunings and thinnings, so you allow light into the understory, and so you can continue grazing cattle here in the understory. And she mentioned that this is some of the best beef that comes out of Panama comes from these types of systems, and obviously there's many benefits that these timber species not only provide in terms of timber, but in terms of better nutrients for the forages, soil conservation, soil fertility, et cetera, et cetera.
También son árboles nativos. Dentro de ellas están los ríos y son amortiguamientos para que no haya tanta degradación a los ríos de los suelos.
Yeah, and this is another important part, more focused on sort of conservation aspects of the farm. So all the gallery forests, that's all natural regeneration. None of that's really planted, but they're all native species. And she was just mentioning it's really important to have those buffer zones to avoid contamination of those sources of water, because as you can see, it's that buffer between the source of water and areas of production where you might have manure or synthetic fertilizers or other forms of sediment that can go into those areas.
Como les hablé, también construimos un corredor dentro de la finca para ayudar. Tenemos monos y para visitar mi finca, tenían que andar kilómetros, y ya ahora incorporamos un corredor y permanecen más en mi finca.
¿Y sirve para qué más que los monos?
Los monos también, de allí tenemos los árboles nativos de frutas que tenemos dentro de la finca, nacido por regeneración natural. Son distribuidas las semillas por los monos y las aves.
¿Y para el ganado?
Internamente, como los que visitarán mi finca a futuro o ya han visitado, las parcelas no tienen muchos árboles incorporados dentro de cada parcela, pero el corredor funciona para sombra y descanso del ganado.
Entonces, English, sorry. So another really interesting thing that you can really see on this map and in the photo is that she's about probably 10 years ago started to establish this biological corridor that runs the whole length right in the middle of the farm, right? And actually connects two riparian areas, or gallery forests, as you can see. And she originally did this because she has howler monkeys in the area that would have to go through this pasture. They would be walking through the pasture to be able to get to the riparian area in the back, because this area is sometimes dried out with water, so they'd go to the back, or if they were going after fruits. So anyway, she developed this and reforested it, right? But she also mentioned, and this goes along with what Luke just mentioned, is that the importance of having these monkeys dispersing seeds, right? Doing reforestation for us. I know we talk a lot about drones doing this, but we also have millions of drones, natural drones, that are out there working, birds and bats and monkeys. But also, beyond doing that in terms of biological conservation, she's also done this corridor. It's to serve as shade for cattle, and also for the cattle to have an access route to have access to all these different pastures, right? So instead of causing a lot of soil compaction and degradation by going through all those pastures, they just have their main corridor that they can travel through that's nice and shady, has fruit, has forage trees along the way.
Ahora vemos la diferencia en años, posible 20 años de diferencia, y la incorporación que hicimos dentro de la finca, que aumentamos la carga de animal, ahorro de insumos de mano de obra muy cara en Panamá, diversificación de cultivos, productos, aumentamos la cobertura forestal, aumenta la vida silvestre, aumenta la captura de carbono, que es muy importante ya dentro de Panamá y a nivel mundial, y la conservación de aguas, que es muy importante conservar las aguas naturales dentro de cada finca.
Mm-hmm. So Odie mentioned that you can visually see the difference between basically 12 years when she first started working with ELTI in 2011 after taking some field courses, and then the most up-to-date satellite imagery from 2023. You can see a lot of the living fences, the division of pastures, the corridor, the expansion of gallery forests, etc. So you can see where native species has been integrated into an active cattle farm. And then so she just gave a nice summary of all the different benefits that her farm has received because she integrates all these native species. Everything from increasing cattle stocking rates. It's not on here, but it went from 1 cattle per hectare to anywhere from 3 to 5 per year. So basically tripling the amount of cattle that she can produce on this farm. A big savings in terms of outside inputs, so synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, using these natural ecological processes that native species provides has provided that big benefit, as well as a lower cost in labor of managing the farm. But also a diversification in crops and products, right? She's just not producing milk and meat anymore, but all kinds of other things, right? Fruits, coffee, timber, you name it. And then in terms of conservation, there's been an overall increase in forest cover, right, across the farm that you can see here in the maps, as well as an increase in wildlife, right, in terms of birds, bats, insects, an increase in carbon capture. As you have increasing biomass across the farm, you're going to capture more carbon. And then finally, the conservation of water sources, which is extremely important in this dry forest region that suffers from regular droughts. And being a cattle rancher, the first thing you have to do is you have to be a water producer more than anything. And she's providing a lot of services, unfortunately, that aren't paid for producers that are downstream.
Igual no tenemos bosques completos porque es una pequeña finca, pero tenemos muchas cercas incorporadas que a la final suma como si fuera un bosque de muchas hectáreas.
Sí, un buen punto. Yeah, well, she's saying it's not like she has like a big complete sort of forest, like a national park or something, but she does have a lot of linear forest throughout her farm, as you guys can see in these living fences, which when you add them all together, I mean, that creates a great benefit, not only in terms of being a whole forest, but the connectivity you have across these very hostile landscapes are made a little bit better when you have these linear sort of multi-strata forests. Buen punto.
Okay. Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our series of speakers. So now, with the remaining 15 minutes, I wanted to invite the speakers to come. Actually, sorry, Jake and Odie, if you can come back and stand here with our other speakers. So Canisius and Bonaventura, please, and Mark and Luke, if you can come and join us on the stage. And we'll have 2 floating mics. So we'll take questions, and if you can just make your question brief so that we can get to hopefully a handful of questions in the next 15 minutes. And then speakers, if you can keep your response concise so we can go into the next question and have a variety of colleagues be able to take a question. Okay. So we can pass these microphones, and I have 2 for the audience as well.
Well, thank you all for your presentations today. I just wanted to ask Odie, what's next for the farm? Like, you've done so much already. Like, what else are you going to tackle in the future?
Sí. En una finca agrosilvopastoril nunca se termina de trabajar y incorporar siempre en mano con el medio ambiente y la naturaleza. Pero aún continúo, me falta mucho en las cercas vivas incorporar árboles maderables y frutables a futuro.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Like she said, that agro-civil pastoral farms, I mean, you're never done with work, right? There's always something you have to do. There's always something that can be improved. There's just constant management, especially over time as these farms, they change, right? Because there's different species that you utilize. So yeah, I really like that answer. And then she mentioned kind of specifically, she wants to improve the living fences and do enrichment plantings with different timber and fruit species. She's done a lot of that, but there's just a lot of potential in the living fences because it does offer opportunities to protect sort of that enrichment of species versus planting in the middle of a pasture. And with so many living fences, it offers a lot of space to do that.
Yeah, thank you. My question is regarding the increase of wildlife on the farm. Some people are worried about some conflicts that could raise from increasing biodiversity on the farm, like what we see back home. Restoration sometimes attracts wildlife. Some of them will be problem wildlife. It might not be very visible for cattle, but since she also grows crops, what can she give as an advice? Because we have a lot of issues, especially with monkeys, attracting monkeys towards the farms, and then monkeys end up crop raiding.
Yeah, great question.
No, no es ningún conflicto. Entre más árboles de diferentes especies tenemos, nunca tenemos un conflicto. Conflictos conocidos, no tengo mucho la ciencia, pero cuando tenemos muchos árboles de la misma especie, allí sí tenemos un conflicto posible de plagas. Pero si tenemos más árboles frutales para nuestras aves, la atrayente de aves, para los monos que se conserven y tengan su propia comida dentro de la finca y en principal frutas para el país o para la familia.
¿Y no tienes miedo que los monos van a venir a comer el maíz? Pero van a comer alguito. Pero bueno, ellos tienen derecho para comer también. Sí. Yeah, so it's an interesting response that she basically is saying that the more diversity that you have, the bigger benefit it provides the farm, right, and for the wildlife. And she mentioned that when you utilize native species, especially the fruit species, for these types of large mammals, that's what they go after. They don't go after her citrus crop or her maize crop or anything with the cattle. And while there is the potential, she mentioned there is potential for some conflict, but that, they have to eat something too. And which, can be perceived as being negative for some farmers versus others. But at the moment right now, she hasn't experienced any type of conflict with wildlife yet. Estaba diciendo que realmente mucha gente tiene esa preocupación que si van a sembrar muchos árboles, frutales y cosas, que eso va a traer muchos animales que van a comer todos los cultivos. Entonces, por eso le gusta su respuesta, que es como positivo, o sea, no tan negativo de ese tema.
Hello. Hi, my name is Valentina. I'm a student here at YEC. And it's been great to listen to all your presentations, very eye-opening. And look, I remember you mentioned in your presentation that these projects tend to be very long in time and limited in funding. So I'm curious if in all these different restoration projects, if there is some involvement of the carbon crediting as a financial mechanism, and if it is, how are you integrating that?
Thanks for that question. I can start just real quick in Ecuador. I think it's going to change if it hasn't changed already, but historically, because in their constitution, they had rights for nature, which is a great thing. It also meant that you can't sell the benefits that nature produce because we'd be taking those rights away. So carbon credits haven't been an option for us.
Hi, I'm Sue Butler, and I have a question about the water in Panama. You talked about your excellent biodiverse management and how it created improved water production and conservation. Can you please describe that process in more detail?
Sí, con la ganadería no estamos afectando nunca las aguas dentro de la finca. Tenemos un pozo, igual tenemos el ganado dentro de las parcelas y a pesar de que tenemos las aguas, los ríos, el ganado siempre consume el agua que le brindamos a los bebederos. La protegemos porque hasta ahorita tenemos muy buena calidad de agua corriendo de los ríos por la protección. Hasta ahorita no tenemos daños a la ecología.
Yeah, so she's basically mentioning that when she started doing restoration on the farm, one of the first things that and this was kind of where ELTI comes in with the farm management planning and sort of long-term support after attending a course, is the development of a cattle aqueduct system. So in conventional farms, cattle drink directly from sources of water, which could be rivers, streams, ponds, and they oftentimes contaminate them, cause erosion, so on and so forth. So what she did in her case, she has a well, and so we developed a solar-powered water system that pumps water out of that well to a high point on the farm and then distributes it through gravity to what she mentioned, where the cattle have water troughs. So that's where the cattle drink water. And then the next step was all the riparian areas were fenced off. So the cattle don't go into the riparian areas anymore. So when you have those areas protected, you get tons of natural regeneration, right? You have a good seed source there. You have the mammals and birds and bats and other mechanisms to do that sort of thing. So for that reason, you see the increase of forest cover in those areas. And I would assume some type of sponge effect, right? Where you're increasing forest cover, you're creating trees that are basically slowing that water across the landscape and infiltrating it more. And I think the other thing that she mentioned is that, having a water system, she's very efficient about her water use, right? The water is primarily for the cattle to drink, right? It's not going into sprinklers that are maintaining pasture grass green all the year. It's not, canal irrigation of sugarcane or anything like that. It's very sort of precise, efficient use of a very limited resource in that area.
Hello, my name is Florencia Montagnini from Yale School of the Environment. I forgot your name, but you'll forget mine too, because it's difficult to pronounce. So we are even. When you are reporting about how different species do better here when they are coming from the high elevation, but you are taking that same species to another location and doesn't do that well. So we have been doing trials with native species in the world, in many regions of the world, including Latin America, and consulting in places in Africa, although not in your beautiful country. But the variability in the responses of the trees when you plant them or take them to a different location where they are coming from, that's a key aspect to be very careful. You don't want to do is to discard the species that maybe it will be much better off in another location. So it's very important. So that's my question for you. If you really keep track of what are the origins, or, you know, in genetic stuff, they call it provenances of the different trees that you're bringing in, because that's a major, major factor. And what you don't want to do is to discard a species that then it may be really good if you know exactly where it's coming from and where it should be very well adapted. So you're doing the right thing, because you have all these ecophysiological variables that are looking at, you know, the leaf size and photosynthesis and all that. Those are a set of variables that are all probably marked by some genetic difference, and the differences are not strong enough, so they are not different species. They're different provenances or different origins. So it's very, my question for you is if you are really taking good data on where the species are coming from, and keep that in your mind when you are trying the species in a different site.
It's me? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, the origin are two. The species coming from Nyungwe National Park, it's at a high altitude called the place. And those originating from mid elevation, those we know where, the origin and the species are well known. There is no confusion. And so why we tested the origin, because we are working, we are assessing the effect of increased temperature, warming on tree species. And so we took species from cold place and the species from warm place. And so those coming from warm place and the cold place, they have been planted in the cold place, in the middle place, and the warm place. The same species from different two origin. We wanted to see and to check and to determine the best origin. Are these originating from low or from high? And the results with the findings show thermophilization, meaning that it is the problem because those species coming from warm place, they are more competitive. And so they make upward movement, shifting from low to high altitude, to high. When the weather become warmer, they have to seek for the place where the temperature is somehow low. And the migration is upward. Those are originating from high, they are not able to survive on the warmer climate, but not all. Fortunately, we have three that are originating from to above 2,700. We are happy that these species coming from highland cold place, they can acclimate in the middle and the low, and they are originated. And so we conclude that these species that are on the top, they are at risk. Why? Because they are no more competitive like those coming from low. When they reach the top, you can imagine what will happen. Some will disappear. That is the problem, and that is the funding show. Thank you very much for your good question.
Canisius, I wouldn't, listening to the differences across the world and the many different benefits and values that people are seeing of native species in other areas where they're better known. Rwanda seems to be a challenge in that there are very few native species trees currently on farmlands. So what are the arguments, what is the rationale that you are using to encourage people to plant native species, given that they don't know them as well, they haven't been used traditionally in these ways, and land is so scarce? What are the arguments, what is the rationale that you are trying to provide to people to try this out?
Thank you. First of all, we want to diversify tree species on farm, because I say that we have only few that grow. And of course, we all know that by increasing the number of species, we increase biodiversity and other associated benefits. We increase the number of species, wood species on farm, and native ones, because we don't want to maintain the dominance of exotics, which have their own problems. First of all, they accelerate soil erosion, the eucalyptus, and there are risks that if there comes pests which can attack those few exotics, we may end up having no trees remaining on farms. So by increasing the indigenous tree species, we increase diversity on farm, we increase the resistance of the system to the pathogens and other factors that may cause tree death. But also we think we would also improve the landscape restoration itself better by using indigenous than by exotic tree species. If farmers adopt them, we can have very good timber tree species on farm, which can give them better timber in the future. Although they grow comparatively slower than exotics, but it's a matter of changing their minds. If they accept, we have three stands of Dendrophragma excessum in a Rwanda arboretum, trees which are 60 years old. They are very big and they can give very good timber. So we have trees that can, when grown on farm, can give very good timber to farmers than eucalyptus do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have one final question from Claude before concluding and moving on to pizza.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to have someone like Mark, who has this huge experience in landscape restoration. I know that most of your experience, you have them within your head. A very little has been put in the papers. So I take this opportunity to ask you about the opportunities and the requirements for implementing functional landscape restoration compared to how restoration was traditionally carried out in isolation or as a separate intervention in the past. How can you help us to understand that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you saying you don't have the foundational information?
Functional landscape restoration, because
Yes.
currently the emerging agenda is to do landscape restoration as a functional system, as we work on trees, farms, communities, livelihood. But in the past, when I read some of the papers, one wanted to do restoration, it's about only the forests, only the riparian areas, without considering the interconnection between the systems to support restoration.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I'm going to go back to the science of place. Every culture is unique. I've heard questions around cattle, and I don't work with cattle. There are no cow. Every cow is penned. The fodder is brought to the cow. The cultures are different. So the first thing I think about in terms of landscape restoration is, again, thinking about the nature of culture and people and how they currently, in terms of their own knowledge, work that land. Every culture, every social, every ecosystem has, and there's two other components to think about too. There are peoples who are indigenous who have worked that land for thousands of years, and there are also colonizing peoples, and they often behave in very different manners. So I think it's really important when you think about landscape and functionality is to really understand social circumstance. That's the first thing one needs to, it's the foundation of understanding what do people know, how do they work the land currently, what are the species that they use, what are their livelihoods. You can't do anything until you understand what are their governance structures, their land tenure systems. You can't do anything until you thoroughly understand social circumstance and the stability or instability of what you can and cannot do. And so I would start with that. I'm not terribly familiar with functional landscape, whatever it is. What is it? Anyway, Florencia is laughing at me, but yeah, it's probably something Florencia knows a lot about. No, she's nodding in the negative. But it's really important to understand livelihoods. That's first. The second, and sort of the nature of land tenure, who owns what. Because if you don't understand how people work the land, then you can't add to it usefully as a restoration ecologist or as a forester or as a conservation biologist that is compatible with the values that different landowners and different peoples and different social drivers have. So that would be the primary one. I'm not sure whether that you would agree with me on that, but I think that's the first thing one needs to think. And so that's social function, understanding the social functions of those lands before you think about the ecological. And then when you're thinking about the ecological, different landowners are valuing that land in different manners for different values. There are landowners that are municipal or communities or private landowners. And so in those circumstances, one needs to think about, well, what are the restoration strategies or the native tree planting strategies that are compatible with these different landowners to move it to a patchwork that is compatible across the whole landscape. Does that help answer some of your questions? So it's complicated, isn't it? And it's bottom up. And I think it's a lot more sustainable than many of the top-down things that go on in the world today with money.
I deceived you all. We have one short question. Laura has promised me it'll be short, and then pizza.
Thanks. Look, just very, very quick. So the beautiful blackbird has not yet returned, but how about other birds or other wildlife, and what kind of tree species or shrub species have colonized the area that you didn't plant? Thank you.
That's a good question. We're getting more into the animal behavior side of things, but there's a really cool species, a white-bearded manakin, which is a small species like this big that also leks, and they really prefer secondary forests for forming their nests. So we're starting to see those leks starting to form in the natural regeneration areas. So this is giving us a chance to test some hypotheses about what drives lek formation in the first place, whether it's like resources, the fruit resources, the forest structure, those sorts of questions. I don't think we'll ever know for the umbrella birds just because they're so hard to study. They're so rare, but yeah, we do see some species coming back. Whether we see those sort of primary forest indicator species like the umbrella bird, we'll have to see, but it'll probably take a long time. Thank you.
Thank you all, and I just want a round of applause for you as an audience for joining us and our speakers especially, so big round of applause. And then just a quick shout out to the Yale and the World Partnership Fund, which is part of the Office of International Affairs, for giving us the big bucks to bring all these colleagues here and do such a rich exchange. Also, thank you to Yale Forest Forum. So there's lots of funding. If you're looking for funding for similar things, I recommend them because they're really generous funders. And thanks to the ELTI staff who laid the groundwork to host such a lovely group. And that's all I have for you. So